Tonight on All In.
You're saying he would not be in charge of HHS?
No, of course not.
Okay, so he's not going to be like
an acting secretary? No.
Well, the cabinet picks keep on coming.
Breaking news, Donald Trump is expected to pick Robert F. Kennedy Jr. to be the Secretary of Health and Human Services.
And Republican alarm over Matt Gaetz is growing.
I have concerns that he can't get across the finish line.
I'm going to be really surprised if he can get confirmed.
Tonight, Cheryl and Eiffel on what's at stake with Donald Trump's picks to run the DOJ. Then, new concern over a Trump plan to dissolve the Senate's constitutional role to install his scandalous picks. Plus, Congresswoman Marie Gluesenkamp-Perez of Washington on her unlikely win and what Democrats can learn from it. And the perfect encapsulation of how bad information spreads by way of Aaron Rodgers and a 5-interception game.
The amazing stat, though, is this a true stat that he's done 4 more picks 7 times and he's won every single one of those games? Is that real?
Yep, 7-0.
When All In starts right now. Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. It feels like every few hours we hear about a new, truly terrible choice for a big job in the Trump administration. So if you're just tuning into the news tonight, if you've been shielding yourself, I don't blame you. And I hate to have to break this one to you, but Donald Trump has chosen the anti-vax, anti-fluoride, HIV/AIDS skeptic RFK Jr., Robert F. Kennedy Jr., to lead the Department of Health and Human Services. Of course, that is the enormous federal agency that does a lot of things. It oversees drugs, vaccine, and food safety, as well as medical research and administering Medicare and Medicaid. In a statement announcing his pick, Trump claimed that Kennedy will restore these agencies to the traditions of gold standard scientific research and beacons of transparency to end the chronic disease epidemic and to make America great and healthy again. That comes, of course, just one day after another appalling nomination of now former Congressman Matt Gaetz for Attorney General. He resigned yesterday. In addition to the fact he basically has no qualifications whatsoever for the role, the Florida Republican tapped to lead the Department of Justice has been the subject of a years-long investigation into allegations of sexual misconduct with a minor and drug abuse. Those are allegations he denies. But now that he's officially resigned from the House, the Ethics Committee's imminent report on Gaetz is uncertain. Sources tell the Miami Herald that the report exists, it's been done, and it is, quote, highly damaging and could be leaked at any time. Today, Democrats on the Senate Judiciary Committee, led by Chair Dick Durbin, urged the House Ethics Committee to share their report and all documentation related to their investigation into Gaetz's alleged misconduct. Quote, we cannot allow this critical information from a bipartisan investigation into longstanding public allegations to be hidden from the American people, given that it is directly relevant to the question of whether Gaetz is qualified and fit to be the next Attorney General of the United States. Now, even one of their Republican colleagues, Judiciary Committee member John Cornyn of Texas, is calling for the release of that report.
I think there should not be any limitation on the Senate Judiciary Committee's investigation, including whatever the House Ethics Committee has generated.
So you want to see it?
Absolutely.
Now, beyond the ethics investigation, the, I would say, near unanimous consensus among members of Congress who know and work with Matt Gaetz is that he's just an absolutely horrible person. That he's a living, breathing troll with no real principles who only cares about himself. And I'm just saying that I don't know the guy. I'm just saying members of his own party despise him. Senate Republicans responsible for confirming him are going public with their concerns.
I will say that was a pick that was, I think, very surprising to the entirety of the Senate. And so we'll assess the nominee on the merits, but there's a process that will unfold that examines a particular nominee's background, their experience, and their suitability for a role.
Do you have any concerns about someone who's been accused of sex trafficking, possibly leading the Department of Justice?
Do I have concerns about that? Well, just to name one, I mean, Matt Gaetz comes to mind. I have concerns about him, about the way he disrupted and really destroyed the House of Representatives for several months. What he did to a really good speaker in Kevin McCarthy and accomplished nothing except getting rid of him and, ruined the reputation of the House of Representatives.
What was your immediate reaction when you heard it was Matt Gaetz?
Oofta. That was literally my immediate reaction.
Now, I think Gaetz is probably the most dangerous and alarming of Donald Trump's picks so far because of the particular powers of the Department of Justice. But most of these nominees, or a lot of them, some of them are whatever, fine. They're what you would expect and whatever. He won the election. He gets to nominate people. But you've got Gates, Fox Weekend host Pete Hegseth for Secretary of Defense, Tulsi Gabbard for Director of National Intelligence, and now RFK Jr. for Health and Human Services. These are not really credible candidates for these jobs. And it seems to me that they have been chosen with the goal of trying to break our institutions and constitutional order. I mean, again, this is not like a partisan or ideological point. Republicans get elected, they nominate people. Those are people who don't have my politics. Some of them don't get confirmed because they're bad. Some of them get confirmed because they can get the votes. But under normal circumstances, I don't think it's crazy to say none of these people would be confirmable by the Senate, as the Constitution requires for the president's most important nominees, his cabinet. But whether intentional or not, I don't know if it's intentional. The effect here is that Donald Trump is testing his Republican caucus early on, demanding a vote to confirm these wildly unqualified nominees, particularly Gates, who they all hate, right? In an attempt to dominate the legislative branch at a moment when he feels like he has maximum power. He can do whatever he wants. He basically wants them to crawl through the Capitol in their underwear and eat dog food out of a can in front of everyone like some fraternity hazing ritual. This is a humiliation exercise. And it's meant to either secure their loyalty or just break the system so he could rule unfettered. Sherilyn Ifill holds the Vernon Jordan Chair in Civil Rights at Howard University, where she is the founding director of the 14th Amendment Center for Law and Democracy. She previously served as the president and director counsel of the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, and she joins me now. It's good to have you here.
Good to be here.
So one of the challenges always is focus, because our focus, our attention is our most valuable resource. Trump tears it from us. So you've got a million things to process. I put Gates in a focus category that it's all its own because of the Department of Justice. Do you feel the same way?
Well, I'm a lawyer, and the Department of Justice is one of the most important agencies in the federal government. I feel compelled to point out that the Department of Justice was created in 1870 for the federal government to have a legal arm to protect Black citizens. And so this is a perversion of the department itself. But the department is also an agency with 115,000 employees. And usually the person who sits at the head of the Department of Justice is someone eminently qualified as a lawyer, in skill, in experience, and in character. Matt Gaetz is none of those things. This is someone who's not even practiced law for 20 years. This is someone who was suspended at one point from being able to practice law. This is someone who has a terrible reputation among his colleagues, who is not distinguished in any way, let alone before the bar. And this is a trolling exercise. But I think Trump's doing some other things here, too. I think you're right about dominating his colleagues. But, you know, Trump never does anything that he has to do. In his first term, Trump nominated some people to his cabinet who at least were competent. You might not have liked them, and you might not have even agreed with the way they executed the job, whether it was his chief of staff or his secretary of state and so on and so forth. He felt at that time that he had to at least meet some modicum of normality. And so there were people like Mnuchin and others who calmed people down. But now Trump knows that he doesn't have to do that. He knows that, one, because he got reelected again, which means all the shenanigans that he engaged in, including his felony convictions, including the attack on the Capitol, did not faze the public from being able to support him. In fact, it appears he may have won the popular vote this time around. But the Supreme Court also told him that whatever you do as president, essentially, that can credibly be called an official act is not something you can be held accountable for. So Trump is only going to do those things he has to do. He no longer has to pick cabinet members who pass the smell test. He can have fun with this. And he can evaluate his Republican colleagues by seeing what they will take, what they will tolerate from him. And we saw some of them. We saw Lindsey Graham last night saying, give Matt Gaetz a chance.
Well, I mean, this to me this is a real test. And it's a test with greater stakes. With very high stakes. Because I don't think that you can even argue, RFK I think is a terrible pick, who could do genuine damage. You can even argue that, like, well, he told us he was going to let RFK go wild on health, right? Matt Gaetz at DOJ is like, no one wants it.
Yeah, I'm going to add the Secretary of Defense nominee, Peter Hegseth, the Fox News commentator as well, because this is someone weekend host. Important distinction. This is someone who, is known to be a white supremacist, known to be an extremist, whose platform, whose book is basically about his opposition to the advancement of black officers to the top brass. And the military is actually a very important area for black advancement. And so him selecting that particular person, and by the way, the Department of Defense has 3 million employees. There's no evidence that this man has ever run anything. The fact that he is a veteran is simply insufficient. And so those two, because these are two very, very important positions, strike me as eminently dangerous. And you're right, it takes our attention, but it also demands our attention because it shows us that Trump has gone off the rails and he was never really on the rails. But there is an even heightened sense of impunity about him now that should alarm us.
I would just say that Hegseth would say that he would deny strenuously he's a white supremacist. He has, I just want to
so did Trump.
Put that in the record. He has tattoos that garnered the attention of essentially National Guard commanders when he was going to be sent on the mission to guard the 2020 inauguration with Joe Biden, and was pulled from that, he says, because he was identified as an extremist, in part because of those tattoos. He thinks it's crazy. I just want to give the full side of the story.
But if you've read what he's written about people in the military, about gay people in the military, about women in the military, about black people in the military, especially in supervisory positions, he is an extremist. That is absolutely true. And
it's the world's, I mean, again, take ideology aside and all this stuff. It is the most complex, powerful, and lethal bureaucracy in the history of human civilization on the planet. Is an accurate description of the entity that he is being nominated to run.
Exactly. And so that's really where we need to be. It's not that you're nominally qualified and you have some unpopular views. This is someone who's never run anything. This is someone who I feel comfortable saying that, at least for me, white supremacy and your opposition to diversity in the military is a deal breaker. As someone to lead the military. I understand that for Donald Trump that it's not, but one of the things we have to do, Chris, is stand on what we know to be true and what we believe. Because a lot of what Trump does is he confuses us. He overwhelms us. I mean, this week alone has been overwhelming
last day,
for all of us.
Intentionally so.
Intentionally so. And what we can do, Chris, is we can end up losing sight of what we know to be true, of what we believe, of what your parents taught you and mine taught me, and what we're teaching our children. And that's one of the challenges for us in this moment, is to hold on to that. We get to call a spade a spade. We get to call a thing a thing. Matt Gaetz is incompetent to be Attorney General. Peter Hegseth is incompetent to be Secretary of Defense. I am confused about Tulsi Gabbard. I don't know what she's up to, but DNI, that sounds scary. And we have to say these things, even if we can't stop them. And we may be able to
I think we
stop them.
can. That's one thing I want to say here with Gaetz. I don't know if Gaetz is going to be the head of the DOJ. I think it is undetermined. And I think he's made a lot of enemies. And you've got the Wall Street Journal railing against him today. And you've got tons of people coming out of the woodwork to be like, no. And that, again, to the extent that the normal functioning of politics, persuasion, public backlash, and these things work, that is a good thing. Early signals and early support for that, to me, is central here.
Yes, and that's why if we throw up our hands and say, I'm so exhausted, and I understand people turning off the TV and everything, but I'm asking...
I wouldn't want to watch me either.
Listen, I totally get it. It's exhausting, and people should take care of themselves. I think that's very important. But I also think that we shouldn't think it means nothing when we express outrage about the way in which Trump is behaving, when we call our senators and say, I don't care what they say. You better hold on to your constitutional power to confirm these cabinet members and fight like hell. It's important for us to say that.
If you are someone watching this right now and you feel defeated too, you should call your senator or your member of Congress.
202-224-3191, I think. 3141?
Call them up and tell them how you feel about Matt Gaetz being Department of Justice, or Pete Hegseth as Secretary of Defense.
Yes.
You should tell them how you feel. This is actually...
That's one phone call, but they need to hear from you. And you can spare that, as difficult as this is. So I'm asking everybody to at least hang in so that the boundaries can be set.
We're equal opportunity. If you really think Matt Gaetz should be the AG, you should also call...
No, you should get some rest.
You should also call your member of Congress. Just express yourself however you feel. It's fair and delightful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Coming up, how far are congressional Republicans willing to go to give Donald Trump what he wants? Next.
What I said is, Brett, and I think this is that all options are on the table, including recess appointments. Hopefully it doesn't get to that, but we'll find out fairly quickly whether the Democrats want to play ball or not.
That was South Dakota Senator John Thune on Fox Today, one day after Republicans picked him to be the new Senate Majority Leader. And he was talking about his first big task, getting Donald Trump's cabinet nominees approved by the Senate. Now, it should be a pretty easy job. Republicans will likely have a 53-vote Senate majority. There's no filibuster anymore for those positions. But Trump's nomination of Matt Gaetz for Attorney General, who is despised as a morally bankrupt carnival barker among many of his party colleagues, has many Senate Republicans understandably unhappy. It's also not clear they'd back Robert F. Kennedy either, who Trump picked as his Health and Human Services Secretary today. Even if they could put together the votes, the confirmation hearings could be long and brutal, which is why Thune is talking about, you heard in there, recess appointments. The Constitution gives a president the power to appoint cabinet members without a Senate vote if both houses of Congress are in recess for at least 10 days. It comes from the early days of the Republic when Congress was not in session as often as it is now, and it could take members weeks to travel back to Washington. So House Speaker Mike Johnson and Thune could agree to adjourn, recess both houses of Congress, and then just let Trump do this thing, basically giving away the Senate's biggest check on presidential power, their power to advise and consent on presidential appointments. This morning, pro-MAGA Senator Rick Scott of Florida, who unsuccessfully ran for Senate Majority Leader, told a reporter that all three candidates for the post, including Thune, who once called Trump's role in the Capitol insurrection inexcusable, had agreed to the recess appointment scheme. But it gets worse and weirder. Some Trump allies are suggesting that even the Senate didn't agree to adjourn with the House. The president could just unilaterally send them into recess and make all the appointments he wants. Checks and balances be damned. This is very clearly not what the framers intended, and it appears to be completely unprecedented. It's so authoritarian that even very conservative legal activist Ed Whelan, who helped push through Brett Kavanaugh's confirmation of the Supreme Court, blasted it today as a cockamamie scheme and implored Speaker Johnson not to let it happen. You can guess how that will go over with Johnson. But how willing are other Republicans on Capitol Hill to abdicate that much of their power to Trump? What can Democrats do to prevent it? Josh Chaffetz is a Georgetown University professor of law and politics. He joins me now. And by the way, since we're talking about Congress, I want to pick up on something that Sherrilyn Ifill said about calling your senators a member of Congress. The correct number to lobby your senator is 202-224-3121. We got that wrong. Josh, let's talk about this. Recess appointments have actually been the site of a lot of contestation over time. So maybe just set up the background here, the status quo ante on recess appointments.
Sure. Well, as you mentioned, right, you have to think about this initially in terms of the late 18th, early 19th century technologies of transportation, right, where Congress would frequently be in the Capitol for a few months, and then they would all go back to their home states for a number of months. So if, say, the Secretary of State passed away during that time, you don't want the country to be without a Secretary of State, right? So the president has the power to temporarily appoint someone with that appointment running out at the end of the next session of Congress. In the modern context, right, that's become a way that presidents can do end runs around the Senate's confirmation role. So Teddy Roosevelt sort of famously used it that way. But recently, starting in about 2007, Senates controlled by both parties have started holding pro forma sessions. So even when they're not in town, they'll gavel in the Senate once every 3 days, immediately gavel it back out. And the point is simply to prevent presidents from being able to do recess appointments. And they've been doing this even when the Senate and the presidency are controlled by the same party, because at least until now, the Senate has considered it really important for it to hold on to that really important role of it.
Yeah, so that this advice and consent is like central. Like senators really feel this strongly. I don't want to go too much. The plan here is so cockamamie that I'm not quite sure how much credence to give it. It basically would invoke a never before invoked part of the Constitution, Article 2, Section 3, that would basically say that when the two houses can't agree to adjourn, the president could just adjourn them and then get his whole, just recess appoint everyone. Does that strike you as even plausibly legal or constitutional?
Well, it's cockamamie because it's so clearly not what any of these provisions were meant for. That said, it's unfortunately not an entirely crazy interpretation of what they actually say. So the Constitution basically requires the two chambers to agree among themselves on any adjournment longer than 3 days. And if they can't agree among themselves, it kicks it to the president. It says, well, we need a coordination mechanism for when Congress is going to be in session and when it isn't. If, the first best option is that the two houses agree with each other, which up to this point, they've always managed to find a way to do. But if they can't agree with each other, then the president gets to adjourn them, as it says, to such time as he thinks proper. So, I think the sort of plan here, or at least, what some people are proposing as the plan, is that the House proposes an adjournment of more than 10 days. If the Senate agrees to that, then Trump can make recess appointments. If the Senate doesn't agree to that, then the idea is that then triggers this provision, allowing Trump to adjourn them to such time as he thinks proper, which would be more than 10 days. And then he could make recess appointments that way, too. It's textually plausible, but it has nothing to do with what any of these provisions were originally intended for.
Also, the country's been around a long time. There's been a lot of envelope pushing in a bunch of different directions on a lot of stuff, and sometimes because of obstruction. And there was lots of test cases about recess, and some of them went up to the Supreme Court about what counts as a recess appointment. As far as we know, no one has ever done this. Like, this would be completely off the charts, new frontier of gutting one of the central powers and duties of the United States Senate for the first time in history.
Yeah, it would be, as I said, other presidents have pushed the recess appointment power, but they've never gone this route of actually sort of conspiring with the House to kick the Senate out of session, even if the Senate doesn't want to recess.
The other reason that people have not wanted to do recess appointments is that I understand. My sense is that under the Vacancy Reform Act, if I'm recalling off the top of my head, they're time limited. And there's also some sense that they don't have the same kind of authority at the place that they're supposed to run. I guess they don't care here because if they're going to smash it all, then who cares?
Yeah, and if you recall, for much of his first administration, Trump ruled not even with recess appointed, but with temporary appointments. That's even sort of one step further down. Yeah, actings. That's even sort of one step further down. And yeah, the traditional understanding among people who study the bureaucracy is that they don't have nearly as much influence within their departments. If you're sort of in it for destroying the bureaucracy, or if you're in it for not actually getting policy effectively through, maybe you see that as a feature, not a bug.
All right, Josh Chaffetz, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Still to come, the perfect encapsulation of the information environment that brought us to where we are by way of Aaron Rodgers and a 5-interception game. We do our own research. Report back next. I'd like to offer a little parable for our age, and I'm going to use sports for a minute here, so indulge me. I promise I'm going somewhere with it. So this week on Sunday Night Football, Detroit Lions quarterback Jared Goff, generally a very good quarterback, was having a terrible game against the Houston Texans. Goff threw 4 interceptions by halftime, meaning he threw the ball, the other team caught it, taking possession. That's bad. It's a turnover. You don't want to do it. At halftime, someone posted a surprising statistic to social media, and it started going viral. Here it is. This is now Jared Goff's 7th career game with at least 4 interceptions. His record in those games, 6-0. Now, for those of you who don't follow football, that is an extremely shocking, improbable, indeed it turns out ridiculous claim. 4 interceptions a game is exceedingly rare. Winning 6 games where you did it? Okay. But it just kept circulating. The original poster even shared what appeared to be a graphic from a well-known sports statistic website to back it up. That looks like StatMuse. And that was apparently enough for folks to just parrot the claim unchallenged. It went everywhere. Even people who should know better, like ESPN host Pat McAfee and Aaron Rodgers, the conspiracy theorist quarterback for the New York Jets, who RFK Jr. apparently wanted at one point as his running mate.
I love Jared. I'm sure he'll bounce back. And the amazing stat, though, is this a true stat that he's done 4 more picks 7 times and he's won every single one of those games? Is that real?
Yep, 7-0.
That's wild. I mean, that's why stats are for what Big Mike used to say, age?
Stats for losers.
They're for losers. Is this true? It's true. You can probably tell where I'm going with this. The statistic is not true. It was a total lie. Just take it from the guy who made it up in the first place. Quoting, "If you've ever wondered how easy it is to spread fake information, I made this stat up while laying in my bed at halftime of the game." And this random Twitter football guy actually makes a pretty great point there. Now, thankfully, this is a totally harmless prank example of disinformation. Doesn't matter. The only consequence was McAfee getting embarrassed and having to walk it back on air. But what happened in that exchange between Pat McAfee and do your own research, Aaron Rodgers, is kind of the entire story of our age, of our information environment right now. These are the guys, those kinds of guys that are doing the vetting of what's true and not in our current information environment. That's it. Those are the guardrails. They are doing their own research, if you will. And it's not just sports. This problem translates across our political culture. I mean, everything. Lies and misinformation and intentional slander about immigration and immigrants and the economy. They're spreading on this kind of terrain where the anti-vax quarterback just parrots an unvetted statistic he saw on Elon Musk's website to millions of people on ESPN. I saw this stat. Yeah, it's true. That's it. That's the whole problem in miniature. A miniature version of the enormous problem that we all face that has gotten us to this point that the rest of us gotta try to find some way to solve. And I will be the first to say we do our part here, but I don't know the answer. I don't know the answer. But boy, oh boy, are we going to have to come up with something. You know, there's always this problem in this era with Trump, particularly of knowing when he's BSing and when he's saying what he's really going to do, because he lies about everything, but then he also says things that he does. RFK for HHS. One thing, well, there's a few things that seem quite clear. One of them that's quite clear is that his plan for mass deportation of perhaps millions of immigrants from around the country is one of the things he promised to do on day one, and he's already named people to top administration posts who want to carry it out. Stephen Miller, champion of the Muslim ban and child separation in the first Trump term, will be deputy chief of staff. Tom Homan, widely considered the architect of child separations, will be border czar in charge of deportations. And we're already learning some of their plans for next year, including sweeping raids, giant camps, mass deportations. They're also already considering locations, talking to private prison companies about drastically expanding immigrant detention centers to hold people before they are deported. But people who oppose mass deportation have also been preparing, and plans to resist are getting put in place around the country as we speak. Maria Inosa is a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist who's president and founder of Futuro Media, and she joins me now. It's good to have you here.
Hey, Chris.
There's a lot, I know, from people that I'm close to and other folks, there are a lot of discussions happening right now, I imagine.
Yeah. The big word right now, and we've been through this before, right? Because during the Obama administration, then during Trump, already we've had this experience, non-cooperation. What does that mean? If they come to your home, you don't open the door, you don't give your name, people are talking to neighbors about doing human chains around homes, a lot of talk about having to do actual civil disobedience, bodies in front of buses. Problem is, you can't do that in front of a plane. Mm-hmm. But there is one thing right now, Chris, that Joe Biden can do, right? And I know it sounds kind of like over the top, but you know what? Mass deportation sounds way over the top. Yeah. He should immediately create an executive order, pardon, path to citizenship right now without waiting. He should immediately start shutting down those detention facilities, because once this train leaves the station, it's going to be happening. And unfortunately, Chris, so many people are just not going to realize it because they're not connected.
Well, so here's my question as I think about this, right? The scale to me is like they're going to do something. They're going to issue executive orders to start doing things. I mean, Barack Obama, to your point, the first 2 years of that administration deported a ton of people. Mm-hmm. And they would say, we're doing felons, not families. We're targeting folks that have criminal record, outstanding warrants. This was the argument they would make. I guess my question is, like, there's different scales this could be that seem to me to range from like bad to genuinely horrifying
we've seen those things already.
Yeah.
So we're in New York City. At the Trump administration during his era, there were ICE agents in front of Ostos Community College on 149th Street in the Grand Concourse right here in New York City, right?